Hello, everyone. I'm Ron Culp. I have the privilege of both working at DePaul and serving as the chair of the Planck Center for Leadership and Public Relations, and we want to welcome you here. This idea to have such a meeting came up. It bubbled up from students who said, hey, all these people are coming into town to be honored, and wouldn't it be cool if we could spend some time with them? And that's what we decided to do. So interestingly enough, a few of our people are trying to find us. One had air trouble coming out of LaGuardia. His pilot got sick. They hauled the pilot off. Thank God it was at the gate and not in the air. We know what happens there. So he hopes to be on the way quickly, and so between the people who are introducing and people who are being honored, we're thrilled that we have three really distinguished guests here so far, and the others are pledging that with transportation issues and the like, that they're going to be joining us before this is over. So want to make sure you know, I think we handed out the sheet on Wi-Fi, always important. You get your own secure Wi-Fi number for when you visit DePaul. And hashtag Planck Mentor. Last year we were trending by the end of the day in Chicago as number 2. So today it's our goal with your help that Planck Mentor will be trending at number 1. Let me introduce students, most of whom I hope you're going to be able to hear, assuming the people assigned to them end up showing up, who are with us today. From DePaul, and the president of our PRSSA chapter is Alex Subject. Alex is here, wave. Oh, good, I like applause. From the University of Alabama, and the president of the PRSSA chapter there, Lindsay Young. Lindsay. Columbia College and its PRSSA president is Dominic Collins. Nice to have you here, Dominic. North Central College and president of and vice president of its chapter, PRSSA chapter, is Win Lam. Win. And Indiana University Northwest and its PRSA leader, Sergio Zarante. Good to have you here, Serge. Valparaiso University and its PRSSA leader, Jessica Sanchez. And Northern Illinois University and its PRSSA leader, and my latest LinkedIn connection is Wes Richter. Wes, good to have you here. Now, when we had this program last year, at the end, and you'll have some time to talk with the people on our panel, and we hope you meet them. As I was walking to the dinner afterwards, Pat Ford came up to me and said, this is really a cool event. I talked to a lot of great students, and I told them to contact me, et cetera, and I hope to stay in touch. So then we planned this event, and we just, send out a FYI note to everyone who's been honored in the past. And before I heard back from anyone, I got a note from Pat saying, could I come back this year? I really thought this was a cool event, and I want to play a role. So we said, we got a role for you. You're going to talk about your reflections of having been honored as a milestone in mentoring candidate, as well as somebody who's been on the panel before, and offer up some of his advice. Then each of the students will be coming up who are assigned to the speakers, and they're going to be asking questions as well. At the end of that, we'll open it up for Q&A, and I think you're in store for a real big treat, and we're happy to have with us to kick things off the Vice Chair and Chief Client Officer of Burson Marsteller, Pat Ford.
So why would I call Ron and ask, can I come back to this thing again this year? Aside from maybe I need to get a life and a few more things to do. So my main reflection about this event last year was this part of it was the highlight for me. I think the questions were insightful. A number of the students did come, and a number have stayed in touch. For those of you, if any of you are out there that said you were going to get in touch and you didn't, it's not too late. This organization is the Planck Center I'm talking about is I think really onto something. There's a thing that happens in day-to-day business, as one author put it, we let the urgent overtake the important, and I think that there's really we who are depending on the waves of new talent and new thinking and new energy in our business. We need to really be investing in that at this stage. And so I'm very happy that the Planck Center is undertaking not only this, but all the programs they're doing, and the PRSSA and the PRSA Foundation and so many other really terrific organizations. I really think I think it's something that says a lot about students when they show up for potential positions with us. We want to see that they've had a serious commitment already to the profession and to what it takes to be in that and what it takes to be great in that. And we'll talk a little bit, and we've got some great experts here on what it takes to be great in that. But a key part of it is to always be learning and asking questions and driving that 360 process with all of our stakeholders that really makes us all better. You know, there's a great famous quote from Peter Drucker. He said about leadership, and he said, good management is doing things right. Great leadership is doing the right things. And I think what we're constantly striving, so, you know, there's a pretty broad spectrum of interpretation about what are the right things and how best we can do that. But I think we always need to be striving for that. And I think as you go through this session here with the great leaders that you have, who I'm honored to be sitting beside, you know, be pushing and be inquisitive and ask those great questions. And then the other thing I would say is the Planck Center also did this Twitter chat sometime recently. Seems like yesterday, but it was probably a couple weeks ago. And you know, I think one of the really important themes through that was that mentoring is something, being a great mentor and a great mentee is something people should be doing constantly and all through their lives and their careers. And it was a funny thing, and I'll close with this and we'll get to the discussion, but Roger Bolton, who's one of the great leaders in our business and the president of the Arthur Page Society, towards the end of this Twitter chat, he lobbed in a tweet that said, always be a mentor and a mentee throughout your career, except Harold Burson. We can give him a pass on being a mentee. And so I'm fortunate enough that my office in New York is right next door to Harold. And I saw him and I said, Harold, you came up in this Twitter chat. And I told him about that. And he said, well, I appreciate Roger saying that, but I'm still a mentee. I've got people teaching me about social media, and he's started reeling off all of his mentors right now, and that's what I would say. It's you are leaders in your part of this profession, and I think that really has a responsibility, which is to keep learning, keep developing those core skills, especially writing. And also to be teachers yourselves and to you know, keep pushing back on why are we doing things the way we are. Abraham Lincoln said, towering genius disdains the beaten path. Don't take that beaten path. You know, don't. I mean, just keep challenging it, and that's what this kind of session is all about. So with that, thank you, Ron and Carla and the Planck Center for having me back. Thank all of you for letting me be here, and I'm looking forward to this discussion. And I'd like to start by introducing Alex Sobchak, who I think will be the first questioner if I have my schedule correct. So thank you, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. I will actually be introducing two of our first panelists for the afternoon. First is our agency honoree. We have Barri Rafferty. Barri is a senior partner and CEO of Ketchum's North America practice. She oversees 9 offices in North America, as well as Ketchum Digital and Ketchum Sports and Entertainment. Barry's legacy of client work at Ketchum includes Kodak's Inkjet launch, Maxwell House's Build a Home America, and the Tostitos Fiesta Bowl. We also have Danny Rubin, who is our young professional honoree this afternoon. He is the vice president at Rubin Communications Group. At Rubin Communications, Danny provides clients with key insight on web content strategy, social media, blogging, and video production, as well as key insights to the millennial market. He also maintains a blog, News to Live By, which shows young adults the career and leadership lessons hidden in today's top stories. His columns appear regularly in the Huffington Post and Business Insider. And to kick things off with Barry, I would like to introduce again Lindsay Young from the University of Alabama.
Hi, everybody. As she said, my name is Lindsay Young, and I'm the PRSA president at the University of Alabama, and I'm honored to be interviewing Ms. Rafferty. So my first question for you, Ms. Rafferty, is as a board member of Step Up and a member of Omni Women, you have dedicated much of your time to empowering women leaders. What is your experience as a female CEO, and what advice would you give to future female leaders?
Great. Well, I actually was in New York at a Step Up big fundraiser last night, so very appropriate, and I am missing an Omni Women panel that I usually facilitate right about now to be here with all of you. For me, it's really interesting. I tell the story that about 5 years ago, I went as the Omnicom representative to the World Economic Forum, and I really had not done much for women's leadership. I kind of felt like my mom had fought that fight, and this generation was great. And I went, and I was one of the 14% of women attending the World Economic Forum. And when you consider that actually it's a rule, if you send 5 people, one has to be a woman, and they've never even gotten to 20%, still today, 5 years later, I left realizing that there was a lot more to be done. And I had a young daughter who's now 16, and I thought, all right, it's time to do more. And so that's when I started actually a program at Ketchum, which then became and was brought to the Omnicom level, and I started doing panels on women's leadership. And it was interesting because at first some of them were leave the apologies behind about women in language, about women in finance, and I did one with CFOs talking about really embracing the numbers and if you wanted to run a business. But what I found now today, as I've done more of this over the last couple years, is really it runs the gamut, and it's talking to men and to women. So I do a lot more now talking to men about equity, about making sure that we're championing diversity throughout our organizations, and whether on the corporate side or on the agency side, is I feel that the need for diversity is really important. At the Holmes meeting yesterday, it was interesting. They had a panel, and one of the spokespeople, one of the tweets was quoted as saying, in PR, we don't have a recruiting problem like engineering, we have a promotion problem. And I think that what I would say to women is, to don't opt out, opt in ways that you can make it work through your career. And, I've been on both sides. I had a global job and I had young kids and opted out of a global job to go run a P&L in Atlanta, Georgia. And my parents were there and had a lot of help with my kids for a couple years before I came back to New York. And it was a sideways move, but it didn't stop my progression. It just took another route. So I think what I would say for the women is, continue to find ways to do both, to have a career and have a family. You won't have balance every day, but it is possible. Continue to support both men and women that are really the talent in your organizations and make sure that you're treating them equally. And I think that we will have shifts in the field and hopefully many more women at the top of the firms and the top corporate jobs in years to come. And I think your generation is definitely going to be the one to do that, and we'll see the difference.
Yeah. Thank you. And I actually think your answer goes really well into my next question. So my second question is, in 2014, you wrote an article discussing your move from your global role in New York City to Atlanta, which eventually led you to where you are today. With this in mind, what advice would you give to young professionals who feel they are overstretched in their post-grad jobs, or to students who are worried about making mistakes and choosing the perfect job?
So there is no perfect job, right? How many of you have been working a long time? You kind of make each job perfect, I think. And I say to people, sometimes the account you work on might not be the sexiest account. My first job was at Burson, Marsteller. And I worked on the Owens Corning fiberglass account, and it was B2B. There you go, thank you. And I kind of wanted to do brand, and I was in the B2B group. So I came up with this program called Discover the Affordable Dream. Believe it or not, we put 200 mobile homes on mall parking lots, and we did the roofing and the insulation and everything, and had like the first 3-page spread in Good Housekeeping magazine. I'm dating myself a little bit here, and I had a great program and got myself into brand marketing, and I was still on a B2B account in the B2B group, right? So I think a lot of what you do is make your job great by coming up with great programs, with great ideas, with great initiatives within a corporation. So what I would say is, really take that accountability to make what you do exciting. I also think running a business, no matter what you're doing, is really important. Don't shy away from the numbers. The numbers tell you stories all the time. Whether you're running a group within a company, whether you're running your own agency or an entrepreneurial business or a P&L within a big agency or even just a big account and a client director, you really have to learn that. And one of my least favorite things in communications is when people say, I went into the field because I didn't like the numbers, because I think we are business people first and foremost. And if we want to be treated as consultants and at the level we are, we need to follow business trends and understand the numbers. And then I would say, if I were at your seat now, I would live abroad if you have a chance, or do something that's more global. I think that the opportunity now in the world is really small, and getting that experience when you're younger, before you're tethered to homes and kids and mortgages, is really easier. So don't be afraid to kind of jump into something. And then the last piece I'll say is don't be afraid to fail. I started businesses, and yes, I run sports and entertainment. At Ketchum, I also started a multicultural P&L, which didn't make it and is now embedded in our organization. I volunteered to run digital, and when I went in, our CEO, Ray Kocher at the time, said to me, what do you know about digital? And this was like 8 years ago. I said, well, more than anyone else knows. I did the research, I had a plan, but none of us really knew. And so, too, I think putting yourself out there, taking risks and chances, and not feeling like you have to know everything before you jump in, I think is a great skill to get you through your career. So if you're not a little bit afraid, a little bit nervous, it's time to move jobs and do something else. You want to always continue to stretch yourself and get out of your comfort zone, and that to me makes it a lot more fun.
Thank you. My next question is, you specifically specialize in brand and corporate reputation, a job that I'm sure has many challenges. What interesting challenges have you experienced, and how did you overcome them?
Well, it's always interesting when you're working for corporations. Sometimes I think the best challenges are the ones that you actually don't read about. If we keep it out of the news, then it's, we've done a really good job, but that doesn't always happen. It's interesting because Ketchum has done a lot of university work in the last couple years, and people asked us, in fact, when we got a call this last year from Baylor University after doing UVA and Penn State, I was at home at a conference call, and people said, well, do you want to take on Baylor and similar, issues around, violence on campus and female and rape and everything? And I said, we do, because for me, being a woman, these are things that we have been able, I think, to progress and educate and change the dynamic on campus and what things should be discussed more openly and taken differently. So what I would say is there's sometimes issues that you're not thrilled, you're not comfortable with, that an organization's gotten into, but I think if you look at the bigger picture and can make a difference more broadly over time, then we can't shy away in this industry from representing those types of issues. And so for me, what I would say is, it's not about being uncomfortable, it's about really looking at the issues or crises that are facing the reputation, whether it's a product, a company, a university, or an individual, and figuring out, can we help them do the right thing and make change moving forward? And if we can do that, I always kind of can sleep at the end of the day.
And for my last question, today you're being honored for being an outstanding mentor in an agency setting. How do you suggest that we, as students and future PR professionals, can lead by example and mentor others?
So mentoring to me is really a part of every day, whether you're on a small team, a big team, it's a reporting relationship. We, like Harold Burson, I have a lot of reverse mentors that teach me things all the time, particularly, as he said, in the digital and social space, because it's just hard to keep up. So I would say just make sure you know you always have things to offer. So you're giving back to people, they'll give more to you. I also think feedback is a gift, and sometimes it's not always easy to take for some of us type A personalities. It's like, oh, I'm an A student, and all of a sudden you get tough feedback. But what I would say is if people are willing to spend the time and give it to you, really take the time to think about it and make it actionable, because those gifts that you're given and that feedback you're given can make a big difference. And then the other thing I would say is to men and women, I always say find mentors and sponsors that are of both sexes. And I feel really strongly about that. I think a lot of women tend to find women mentors and they want women leaders. And, men have a different perspective. And, I'll come out of a meeting and I'll be like, can you believe, they were saying that? And, oh, my God, there was no sensitivity and blah, blah, blah. And the women are so empathetic and are like, oh, you're right, those whatever. And I'll go to a guy that's, someone, and I'll talk to him. And he's like, what are you talking about? So their perspectives are very different, and I think it's important to get feedback from both perspectives and to find people that are also going to really be honest with you. Sometimes, the ones that you think are really mentoring you, if they're overly empathetic and overly supportive, then you also, I hate to say it, but they're more of a friend than a mentor. So just, look at those relationships, seek them out, make sure you give and give back in return, but find that diversity of relationships that are going to help you over the time of your career. And they could be all different. It could be your parents' friends to peers to, people in different industries. It really varies. And at different times, I find that those relationships are very broad for me, and it's made a big difference.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ms. Rafferty. We all really appreciate the time you set aside to answer those questions. Up next, we have Sergio Zarate, and he is the Public Relations Coordinator of PRSSA at Indiana North University.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm going to be questioning Mr. Rubin, but before I start, I want to say, Mr. Rubin, those are some fantastic socks you have on. I absolutely love them. I need my own pair later on.
We'll talk later.
Oh, we'll talk, okay. So my first question is, and I've done some of my homework on you, my first question is, you run a very successful blog, News to Live By, in which you find career and leadership lessons that are hidden within each day's top stories. I've read it and I've deeply appreciated all the work you do for it, and while it hasn't affected my life in 110 ways like it has yours, it's still been a guide to me as a young professional, and for that, I thank you.
Thanks a lot.
My question, though, is the process you use when choosing which headlines you use for blog purposes. Do you try and find an unbiased source of news, or do you have a set list of places you check and try and get different views or points on the same headlines? And do you feel this affects the subject matter of your blog?
Can we start with an easier question?
That is the easy question.
Well, thank you for what you said, and thanks for letting me be here. So with my blog, I do look for what the news is teaching us, and I made a very conscious decision when I started that blog to not make it political, left or right. And I don't seek out news from sources that are clearly labeled as left or right. I'm looking more at the national news sources, the ones that we all know as sort of the. Now I know every media source has its, quote unquote bias, but some are left or right-leaning blogs, and then there's news. There's CNN, there's Fox, there's NBC. I'm looking. Often, what I do is I go to Google News and I just say, like, what's happening, in the world, and I'm not looking for stories that are really politicized or that people have strong emotions about, left or right, because that's not what I'm trying to do. What I want to do is help us find something from that story, how a person spoke, how a person acted, that's like a leadership lesson or a career lesson, regardless of political persuasion. I think that would only detract from what I'm trying to do. and make people wonder if I have a lean one way or another, which I don't. So I'm looking for straight on national news and looking for the straight on career advice so that the lesson gets through and you're not distracted by, well, does he have an agenda here? Does he have a bias here? I don't want that. And I will stay away from stories that are really sort of hotbeds because it's not going to help me make my point, which is young professional leadership and communication tips. That's what I'm all about. There's enough out there that is slanted and argumentative. I said, if I'm going to write a blog and add to the ecosystem on the internet, I can't be picking fights. There's too much of that already, and I don't want to contribute to that. I want to be right down the middle. And frankly, I think the middle is wide open because everybody's hanging out in the corners with people who they agree with, and the middle is pretty open territory. So I'll go hang out there for a while. There's lots of room.
All right, my second question, I guess this is the tough one, I guess. You have accomplished many things in your life, one of which being the word of the Planck Center for Leadership and Public Relations, Milestone and Mentoring, Young Professional Honoree. You describe yourself as the guy that can be counted on to roll up his sleeves and get the job done, a quality that many people highly value, not only in the public relations field, but also in life in general. It's clear that you have a passion for that and that you feel great pride in what you do, and you stated that even that's who you are. But has there ever been an instance in which the passion and drive to be the guy that can be dependable wasn't there? Do you have to somewhat step away from what you're doing to really find that passion again? Or is it more of a case of pushing through and forcing yourself to accomplish those things?
My father's here. He's watching me squirm. Look, here's what I'd say. One thing I've learned, and from college through, I'm 31 now, so in my 20s and now, I've been careful to take things on that I can do all the way. And I'm learning more and more to say no and to not try to be everything to everyone and not be some superhero, because I'm not. I just had a baby, and that's really important, and I want to be home sometimes too. And so I certainly have things in the community that I'm passionate about, and obviously professionally, but I'm setting limits. And I don't think you're any good to anybody if you're doing 10% here, 10% there, or you're a member in name only, or it's not about my resume. I'm not trying to pad it. I just want to do the work that I'm really into and that I believe in, and understand that there's just certain things I'm just not going to have the time for, so don't go down that road. And don't give people false expectations of what you're going to do. If I commit to it, I'm doing it all the way. And to do that, I have to be, judicious about what I choose. So I can't think of something where I feel like I totally dropped the ball because I couldn't do it. If I'm part of it, I'm going to work hard. And otherwise, I'm just going to leave it be for the next person. What else can you do?
Mm-hmm. All right, and for a third question and the final one, through your blog,
Can you ask my favorite color or something?
Orange and blue. Is it blue? Okay. through your blog, you highlight what is valuable within the public relations world, such as real-world skills, ability to follow through, and the importance of the fact that social media isn't a place to have conversation; it's a place to begin conversations. All of which are All of which are easy to learn as hopeful public relations professionals. Yet some of us have skills that aren't really discussed with much detail, as how to have a professional social media account, one of them being a value of a foreign language. I grew up in an environment that required me to be proficient in 2 languages and really forced me to understand 2 very different cultures. I'm very grateful, though, because as I grew, I was never really alienated in either culture due to being understanding how to navigate through both of them. My only concern, though, is what is the value of someone like me that understands and can communicate in 2 languages and between 2 cultures in the public relation world?
What's the value of speaking two languages?
What do you like? What's the value of being able to be a part of two different cultures? And like, because I don't know many people here, but I assume that there are some people in the communications and public relations world that have different cultures or two different languages. What is the value of someone like that?
Well, I speak one language and a little bit of Hebrew, but look, I look at languages like any other skill. We talk about resumes, and often people will show me the resume, and the skill section will be like motivated or excellent time management or leadership. I'm like, well, that's nice, but what do you know how to do? Like, if I put you in front of a computer tomorrow, what can you do tangibly? What software have you worked with? What tools do you know how to use? Any certifications? What languages do you speak? So I think there's a tremendous upside. What's your second language?
Spanish.
Okay. So certainly Spanish matters more and more in our country every day. I'm sure I'd benefit if I spoke it. We all would. So it can only serve to help you, particularly if you're applying for jobs that you can tell that's something that matters. You're going to have a leg up on someone who doesn't speak Spanish or doesn't speak it fluently and understand the culture in which Spanish lives and operates. So it can only help you. It's one more skill that you have that someone else might not have. And you understand it so well because you've known it from birth. So to have more is better than having less.
All right, thank you for your time, and sorry for giving you such a hard time.
I'll see you later.
I'd like to introduce Dominique Collins, PRSA President of Columbia College.
Hi, everyone. So thank you so much for having me here. I really appreciate it. I have two questions for Pat. So I'm going to start off. So what steps can students here today take to be in your position?
So, first of all, what you're doing now is one of those steps. I think as I said earlier, this constant process of teaching and learning through an organization like this is really great. I've got to say, the thought that keeps coming in my mind as I'm listening to the questions, and I was thinking about this was the same last year, wouldn't we be much better off in our presidential campaign right now if the debates had questioners as talented as the group we've had here, and we're on point as you are. But second, I think I've got a couple of thoughts on this, and it actually builds on some points that Barry and Danny have already made. At this stage, really focus on building your core capabilities and your core skills. Writing, be voracious readers, voracious consumers of all media, not just social media, but really there should be, by the time you get to a certain point in the day, that you've been through whatever you consider, and it's different for people with different focuses. That's why I wouldn't just say you need to read this, or this. In fact, when I started out in my career, there were probably about 4 or 5 things that you probably could say, well, you need to read the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, Washington Post. But now there's actually, in Washington, where I spend a good deal of my time, if you told me when I started in my career that the Washington Post might not be the most important political publication in Washington, I'm not even sure it's second or third now, but certainly it's not first. That probably is Politico, I would think. But the point is, it was something that didn't exist when I started my career. So I think, number one, focus on really, I think Barry was making this point, don't get bogged down in, what is this, I don't want to do this for the rest of my career, or how am I going to do that? And really, to build on a point that Danny was making, find your passion in whatever that is. When I started out in newspapers, the rule in that paper, I guess it was a rule, I didn't like it, was your first assignment was writing obituaries. Okay, so I thought this was such a dead end. I almost quit the job. I really did. I went home and I said to my wife, they're telling me I'm going to do obituaries. So the good news is I'm off the copy desk, copy boy desk. I mean, not the copy rewrite. So I'm not a copy clerk anymore, but my first assignment is to write obituaries. But then I thought, you know what? I mean, so then I started to, this is the process to go through. So what can I do that's maybe a little different about that? What is the role of obituaries at this newspaper? And the paper I worked at was it's now a small paper, was then a mid-sized paper across the Hudson River from New York. If you were really looking for the day's hard news, you weren't buying that paper. You were buying the New York Times at the subway station. When you bought our paper, you were getting the local sports, the local high school and college sports, and very important, you were getting the obituaries. I mean, so by the time I was done giving myself this pep talk, I was the most important person in that newspaper. And the second question was, what does that mean to be an obit writer at this paper? What it meant when I stepped into it was you were calling about 60 funeral homes in the area, and you were writing these little blurbs about people who had passed away. But I came out of a blue-collar family where nobody got their names in the paper ever, except for one time, when they died. And then we all cut it out, and I still have at my home, in probably in a box somewhere, laminated copies of the obituaries of my grandparents, my uncle who died young. This was the one time in their lives that they got their name in the paper. So number one, this was an obsessive mission. 0 defects. In other words, I was going to get everyone. If you told me the name was John Smith, I didn't assume it was John Smith. I checked everything, and I tried to be. So the best was, first of all, the quality. Second, what else could we be doing with this? So we tended to run these little blurbs, and then we'd run a wire service thing on somebody famous who died. So I didn't even really ask permission for this. I just started developing a lead local obituary that I went and found out more information, called up the funeral home, talked to the family. In one case, the widow invited me to her home where they had this big Irish wake going on. I was there till 1:30 in the morning. People were laughing uproariously and telling stories about this gentleman. And I wrote this obituary that caused this widow and her sister to come in the next day to the paper, to our editor, carrying a thing of flowers for me and saying that everybody in their family, just all they were talking about was how I had captured, really they helped me capture this gentleman who wasn't a world leader. He was really important in his community, though, in his church. He volunteered his time to help refinish their furniture and so on. He was just a really great, I wish I'd known this guy. And as we were walking out of the editor's office, he was a really short guy, and so he put his arm around my shoulder like this, and he said, you're the best damn obit writer this paper ever had. That was what I wanted to be. So whatever it is, if you come in and we're asking you to work the sign-up desk at a news event, figure out what's the best way to, maybe we're not doing that the right way. Just keep asking, pushing back. Is this the right way to do this? Could I try this differently? And I could give you a million examples of that, and I think Barry was referring to a few. And so find that passion in that. Be the best at what that is, and I guarantee you won't be doing that long. And one other thing, whatever you're doing now in your internships, whatever you're doing in the graduate program, whatever you're doing in those first 1 or 2 or 3 years, that's not going to be what you're doing the rest of your life. Almost certainly it's not going to be. And certainly I never thought, I've been in PR for about 30 years. I never thought, I didn't even know what PR was when I moved over to this. I thought I was moving over to work in a think tank. I thought I was just doing public policy. And so I would say, focus on core skills, especially writing. Second, just keep really pushing to learn as much as you can and have a broad perspective on the world, not just on this. Think about, not only where those opportunities are, and I'll finish up because I'm sure you don't want me to filibuster the whole time. But I thought a lot about this the past few weeks. Did anybody here watch the Emmy Awards on TV a few weeks ago? So I admit it's a little guilty pleasure of mine. I watch award shows. I can't get my wife to watch them, but this year's Emmy Awards had a moment in which they gave a Best Actress award to Viola Davis. So if you didn't see that broadcast, you may have actually seen this in social media. And she got up to accept this, and I always see these things, by the way, on DVR, because you got to fast forward through when they're thanking their agent and thanking all these other people. and they waste. They've got an audience of millions, maybe with the Oscars, 1 billion people, and they waste. It's so tragic to see them waste that time. She didn't waste that time. She got up and she said, in my mind, so I'm just going to be close. These aren't the exact words, but this is burned in my mind. In my mind, I see a field, and on that field there's a line, and across that line there are green fields and beautiful flowers, and lots of white women gesturing me to come over. But I can't get over that line. I can't get over that line no how. She said that was Harriet Tubman in the 1800s. And I'm here to tell you that the only thing standing between women of color and everybody else is opportunity. Those words were burned in my mind because that's what we, the leaders of our business, Barry referred to this, are thinking about all the time now. How can we create more opportunities for everybody? For everybody, especially people who, I mean, frankly, I just run our Asian business. You have to have multiple languages and multiple understandings of culture. You work in our Hong Kong office, ideally, you're speaking 3 languages, English, Cantonese, and Mandarin. And some of them, we have to have people working those. But it's way beyond just the language. It's the understanding the culture and respecting it. And I would say the only thing I would add to Viola Davis's comment would be not only that we need to have those opportunities, but you need to recognize them, and you need to have the understanding and the self-starting nature and the courage to seize those opportunities, because that's really what sets all of us apart. Thank you.
I completely agree with that, Pat. Thank you so much for saying that. My next question is, the world of PR is changing, and so is just the world in general, media, technology, and everything. So the PR profession evolves. As the PR profession evolves, what do you see as the biggest challenge for myself and for my peers 20 years from now?
So Barry just said, wow, 20 years. I've got to tell you something. 20 years ago, this was such a different business.
I was waiting in line at the fax machine.
Right.
There was one per floor.
Well, let me go back to when I was a reporter. There was no fax machine. It was, so number one, but that leads into what I was going to say, which is not only understand that the pace of change is accelerating in itself, but embrace that pace, embrace change, and embrace that things are moving constantly. This is not an era, if there ever was an era, where you can just kind of read the crypt notes on something and coast your way through. This is that, but what a lot of us believe is that's what's really exciting. I think this is the most exciting time to be getting into this business because the opportunities are boundless. The pace of change is, does everybody know what Moore's Law is? Anybody know what Moore's Law is? You want to tell us what?
Computer law, right?
Right.
Rapid pace.
Exactly. At an ever increasing rapid pace, right? And you know who Thomas Friedman is in the New York Times, and he wrote a book called The World is Flat a few years ago, and it opened a lot of people's perception of how the world has changed. His new book that he's developing now is called The World is Fast. And he talks about that Moore's Law. It doesn't just apply to technology, it applies to everything. And so the digital evolution, in fact, there was just a study, in fact, I retweeted it, by the World Economic Forum the other day about the issue of whether we're right now entering the 4th industrial revolution. And this industrial revolution is about the combination of digital and physical. And you think about businesses like Amazon or others, or Walmart. Is Walmart a store? Or is that a digital business? And so many, one of our clients, Pitney Bowes, for 20 years ago, we thought of Pitney Bowes for what? The postage meter, right, in the office. Pitney Bowes now is a digital, mostly digital company. And it's way beyond postal. I think they still make, I know they make postal meters, but it's way beyond that. So the world is changing. Keep looking for that change and seize that opportunity, because it's really an opportunity for everybody here.
Thank you so much,
Absolutely.
all of you
Thank you.
panelists.
Great
I'd like
questions.
to introduce Malaya Peterson. She is the VP of Professional Development at DePaul.
All right, thanks everyone. So I'm going to open the floor up to questions now. So if you have a question, I'd ask for you to just raise your hand and then stand up, ask your question. And since you guys do not have a microphone, I will repeat the question for everybody to hear. So just make sure you're speaking loud and clear, just so I can hear you as well. So with that said, does anybody have any questions for our panelists?
I'd like to hear the question we were going to be asked to the educator who's not here, but I'd just like to hear what the student is thinking.
Which one? All of them?
Cameron? Yes.
Yeah, you can. Do you want to like come up here and speak?
So would I be asking these questions?
Well, we have educators here. Ask the questions
Yeah,
and we'll
ask
get to them.
questions.
Okay.
Come on up.
I'd like to know what you're thinking of.
Yeah.
Sure, why not?
Just so everyone can hear you. Well, thank you for having me here. Well, I think this question can be answered either by our educator or any PR professionals that we have up here. So many think of public relations as a practice-based discipline rather than theory-based. But from your perspective as someone in the field for a really long time, how would you encourage the learning of theories for success in public relations?
I mean, I have taught at NYU, and you know, it's always interesting because I think, truthfully, the combination of some of the theory, right, of persuasion, of psychology, behavior. I mean, you know, what we're trying to do is change mindset and change behavior on many, many topics, and also when you're introducing new products and on people being accepting. And I think there is a lot of, you know, pieces of that that start way before the tactics of understanding the consumer, understanding the different, as you talk about, the nuance of someone that's raised in a very culturally Hispanic family and the mindset and what they come from versus an urban setting or a different setting. So what I would say is don't dismiss all of that. I find sometimes my minor in psychology comes in better than my communication things in terms of getting how people think and how they behave. And I think that the other piece now is, you know, when you talk about the evolution is in storytelling. And you talked about, you know, starting with the obituaries. Well, what does that story look like? And with your attention span today, which if I had to guess in this room, you're reading about 7 seconds, and if it doesn't catch your attention, you're on to the next thing. I think it's gone. It went from like 25 seconds, you'd wait till a video to load. Now it's like 11 seconds. If it doesn't load, you're out and on to the next, right? Does that sound familiar? So what that says to me, though, is you need to understand the behavioral side. You need to add the technical side as well as the content and the tactical side. And I think if, you know, you look 20 years from now, I think that technology and the intersection of all the types of technology that we have are going to play an even more important role in this industry. And I think that the storytelling now is starting to shift, that we need better types of producers and art directors and visuals. And, you know, what we used to do in this business even 3 years ago could be clip art is no longer acceptable. We're way past that. So I think that as you think about where you're going in this industry, bringing all those things together and the integration of those is where you're going to be really successful. And that takes a lot more learning and a lot more attention to where people are coming from, what technologies are entering their world, what they're opting into, and how you can break through with your story. And so that integration is going to be critical.
And if I could just add that in fact, I would just say that my feeling, Barry's firm and her colleague, Rob Flaherty, you do a lot in that drives understanding of the underpinnings of public relations. There's a lot of work that gets done in Ketchum which has a great research capability. Both Rob and I, Barry's colleague Rob Flaherty at Ketchum, and I are honored to be on the board of an organization called the Institute for Public Relations. And their motto is, we're about the science beneath the art of public relations. And I think more and more there's attention being paid to the need for an underpinning of research and fact-based, evidence-based communications. And this applies to things like behavioral science, to things like the dynamics inside organizations and internal communications implications of that, and many other ways. And so I think more than ever, and I hope our educators in the room agree, more than ever, that nexus of academia and the practitioners of public relations are seen as fundamentally related parts of the overall profession. And I'm proud to be with them.
Thank you very much for your answer. And I think my next question would be going back in time a little bit. And I know Mr. Rubin, you had an interest in social media. For Barry, you had an interest in women's issues. And then for Pat, I know Burson, Marsteller, and then you do a lot of crisis communication. I'm just not sure which division you are. But how did you get interested in your current area right now, and what keep you going until this point?
Sure. Well, most of my career, so I've been at Burson Marsteller for more than 26 years, which is 107 in human years. I started out in our public affairs group, and then later ran our corporate practice. And much of my work through the years has really been in the nexus of those two areas, which is issues management and crisis communications, but also not just helping to repair reputations, but also helping to build and strengthen corporate reputations. So that whole broad area has been where a lot of my focus has been over the years, and I've worked in many different industries and many different issue areas. And that's part of the fun. If I can just make an advertisement for the agency side of the business, it's such fun to it still is to really dive in deep and get to know a business and get to know a company and work with them on really incredibly important either opportunities or problems. And for those of us who maybe have short attention spans, it's just great to, it's just a constant adrenaline rush. And then, I think the importance of that in terms of not just how a company does business, but even its ability to get business done is incredibly fundamental to success.
No. We switched.
Social media, right.
You need to remember the question.
I was trying to remember where the question came from. So is my thing social media? My thing, particularly with my blog and the advice that I give, I've been, everybody's out there looking for, what are millennials like? Where do they eat? Where do they shop? What do they do? Mm-hmm. My thing is, what are they looking for to become better communicators? Where are the struggles? Where are the pain points? Where are they looking for answers? And more I've come to understand that writing skills are the sort of the number one where people are willing to go out and look for help, seek help, pay for help. That's where they're like, I gotta write this better, I have to come across better, and I'm willing to ask for help on that. So my area that I really focus in on is understanding that side of the millennial generation. And we've grown up as, texting and tweeting, but then we also have to live and play and work in this world that demands that we are communicators on a higher level than that. So we need resources to do that. We can go text with our friends and go on GChat, but then we also have to flip it and write emails to people like this, who are very successful and need you to be on your game, or they are going to go to the next person. So that's really, and social media is a part of that, because I go out and I'll learn and I'll talk to people, and I use social media to create relationships and listen. But I've just been on kind of my own little listening tour, the last few years, and following my Google Analytics, if anybody's familiar with that, that's like my lifeline to know where's the traffic flow, what are people reading, what do they care about, what matters to them, and then trying to just keep delivering that back using all the different channels that we all know. But to say my focus is social media, my focus is really on understanding my audience and then delivering that through social media.
All right, so now I'm going to open up the floor to questions. So just a reminder, raise your hand, stand up if I call on you, and then speak loudly enough so I can hear, and I'll repeat the question. So does anybody have a question to start off with? Yes, Jessica?
My question's for Danny. Your blog has lots of good tips for PR professionals. Do you take from your own experiences?
Absolutely. A lot of what I write about is drawn from working in PR. Storytelling, as they said, is huge. And I really encourage people to tell stories of success on the job as you look for jobs. Leverage your stories. Be specific. Tell people what happened. Use detail. Don't be afraid to let them in a little bit and share what occurred and how you fought through and were successful. Also, being brief, keeping your messages short, chopping out words. That's stuff we do all the time in PR, writing press releases or helping put together a marketing campaign, slogans. These are skills that we are using with clients that apply just the same as you go on your professional journey, leaving school, applying for jobs, applying for internships. We want to be the people on the other end who receive the message, whether it's an advertising campaign, a PR message, or a job application. We want to be entertained, we want it to be memorable, and we want it to relate directly to what we need. So you have to really understand your audience and who you're talking to and what they're looking for. And often it's as easy as looking up the company's website or someone's LinkedIn bio and then sprinkling in some details about that person or about that company that makes you relevant to what you're applying for. It's not a matter of more work, it's a matter of how you approach it. And that's straight out of public relations. It's just really knowing who you're talking to and what they need.
Thank you. All right, also, sorry, I forgot to, when you ask a question, please just introduce yourself so everybody can know who you are as well. So any other questions? Yes?
Hi. First, thank you all so much for being here. My name is Leah Stay. I am a master's student from the University of Alabama. And this is just a question for all of you. As executives, you guys have the unique opportunity to help, create and foster that organizational culture in each of your companies. What are a few things that make each of your organization's culture unique?
So I was in our Chicago office today, and we have a lot of new hires this year, and they asked me the question of what's the most important attribute of our culture. And it was very easy. I apologize, I'm having terrible allergies today. Generosity. And it sounds funny, and it's one of our tent poles in North America, because I believe that if we're a collaborative culture, if we support each other, if ideas can come from all different places, if we support creativity, then we're going to be a better agency. And I think that that goes in how we operate in a borderless way as we become a global agency, how we seek out the best people no matter where they sit, and also how we collaborate with our clients and with other partners and agency partners today. And well, I'll tell you, it's like you get thrown in and it's like, here's the ad agency, the digital agency, the PR agency, and who knows what else these days. And, it's like work together and come up with something. So how we're able to navigate that really gets the best outcome for clients. So it's maybe not one that you'd expect, but I think it's one that makes a big difference every day is how we treat each other.
I think we're fortunate at Burson Marsteller that our founder, Harold Burson, is still there. In '94, he still comes into the office every day. He hasn't run the firm for a long time. I tell him he just walks the earth and does good things. But I draw the parallel to my extended family, where my mother's mother and my father's father lived into their mid-90s, and while they were alive, there was no question about what the culture of that extended family was. It was driven by that matriarch and patriarch. And so when I think about our culture, I think about it being driven by Harold Burson, and maybe back when you were starting out, and it still is today, which is about generosity of spirit and about always looking for ways you can. I mean, we used to have the motto, "Best alone, better together." I don't know if that was when you were there, but you can be great yourself. But if it's just you, if it's just you, it's not going to be that great. If you were a great cellist, like Miroslav Rostropovich was a great cellist in the 20th century, but what made him a great maestro of the National Symphony Orchestra for many years wasn't his cello playing. It was what he brought out of that orchestra and how he supported the members of that orchestra and the communications and subtle cues he sent all through an incredible symphony, and how he channeled the creativity and the spirit and the vision of the composer, and then applied his own interpretation to that. There are many elements that create a successful engagement with our clients, and a lot of it for me draws right out of Harold's lessons. His focus on the client's business and understanding that business and loving their brands and really showing respect for them. Many of his best business contacts through the years are people he started out with when they first were interns at Burson Marsteller, or they weren't even working at Burson Marsteller, they were at another place. And we know a professor was giving a talk one day, and he said, here's what I want to say about Harold Burson. 30 years ago, he put his arm around me, and he never let go. And the question I ask our team all the time, every day, and maybe you do too in a different way, is whose arm are you putting who are you putting your arm around now? And what does that mean? And are they going to say that 30 years from now about you? Because I sure hope they are. Because you know what? If they do, that's going to be great for them, but it's really going to be great for you and for the overall organization.
Well, thank you. All right. Does anybody else have a question? Yes.
Hi, my name is Kim Kovacic. I'm a sophomore at DePaul University, and I'm just wondering what media are you watching, reading, listening to? This is a question for all of you.
Sure. I kind of jump around. I read New York Times, Washington Post. I read my local newspaper. I still get my local newspaper on the weekends, the print version to my house. I think a Sunday paper is great, and I don't know why that should go away. I mean, it's a Sunday morning and the paper's there. Yeah, I could read it on my computer, but there's something nice about it. And I also like crossword puzzles in pen, not online. I try to read some different blogs. I kind of jump around. I like Slate. I check out Lifehacker. I'm looking for, because in my blog I send out a newsletter and I look for other interesting, very practical articles, whether they're career related or sometimes maybe financial or about buying a house, just stuff that's, again, I'm not looking for stuff that is political or has an angle. I'm looking for, you could take this and use it, and I didn't write it, but someone else did, and I think it's valuable. So I try to find blogs that I think provide really straightforward information. Sometimes Huffington Post, not for their political stuff, but they do some other, sometimes sort of straightforward, like news you can use kind of stuff, and that's where my head's at. But I also read a lot of columnists. I read Thomas Friedman and David Brooks. I love the New York Times columnists, Washington Post columnists. I try to learn from them and how they structure arguments and how they'll have one argument that'll flow from the beginning to the end. And there's an art to that. And I try to watch them closely to see what they do. I'm not talking about politics, but it's just the idea of holding someone's attention all the way. That's so hard today. And can you do it in 300, 400, 500 words? You got to be pretty good or someone's going to just flip to the next page or the next screen. So I really watch closely, and I use those people as, I guess, mentors. They don't know me, but I'm reading them, and I'm reading it for information, but also to see what they're doing and how they're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a news, that's awful, news scanner. My iPhone has the news feed comes through it that has everything. I go from the New York Times to the BBC to Prevention Magazine to Mashable to Reddit, and I get a constant feed. And so what I love is, we have a ton of food clients. I'm looking at what the food trends are as much as I'm looking at the global perspective. In the morning, I put on either BBC or the NPR news feed while I'm getting ready on the radio, in the bathroom. To try and hear, because I also feel like if I just look at the news through the U.S. perspective, it's a little different. And when you're working in places like China or Europe or others, how they cover things is always really interesting. So I try not to just go through North America sources, but others as well. There's a great app called 360 News where you can see one story in like hundreds of outlets. So sometimes if you don't want to be biased, it kind of takes you through different ones. But to me, I'm a bit of a news junkie, but I also still like the magazines and the trends, and I'll pick up an InStyle here and a Vanity Fair there, and all of those. Because I just think one of the things I always tell young people is to opt into lots of things. I think that when we used to read, and I do still read, like the Sunday Times, I do still like, but when you used to read the paper, your eye would go over the art section and you'd see what was happening on Broadway or in the music sphere or at the Emmys, and then you'd go to the science section. And when you opt in, I say to my kids, don't just opt into what you like, opt into just things that are going to culturally extend your reach, because so much of what we do is make connections with a client to something in pop culture, to a trend or a target audience. And if you're just looking at the things directly that you're interested in, some of that connectivity you're not going to be able to make in our industry. So to me, the diversity is just as important as being out there reading a lot.
So a couple of points. Every day there are certain publications, the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, at least, that by somewhere early in the day, I've been through it. So I actually just read the paper version on Sunday, actually, get the Times and the Washington Post. But during the week, the beauty right now is all these publications, their online versions are so much more navigable than were even just a few years ago. And so we can move through those very quickly and comprehensively. But then beyond that, there are aggregator sites. So speaking of columnists, there's a Drudge Report, which has all that you can click onto a lot of the different columnists. And then I DVR every day the BBC World News America, the afternoon Catty K, although she hasn't been on lately, but that's a half hour that, to your point, is much more comprehensive about what's happening in the world than most of our U.S. evening news broadcasts. But I usually try and see at least one of those if I can. And then during the course of the day, every opportunity I have, I go to Twitter. So I'm following all those columnists Annie mentioned and many others, following all these news organizations, because now it's not just waiting for those articles to come out. They're tweeting about it as they're developing the piece. And so every spare moment, just a little earlier, I was in a cab coming over from my earlier meeting, and in that 10 minutes, I probably was through about 25 or 30 things, because you can go through them really quickly, right, on the 140 characters, but then link out to, click onto whatever it is. So I think the beauty, but also the challenge right now is there's so much access, and I think it's just a question of focusing and on both those things that are important every day, but then also just that little bit of pleasure. For me, it's the New York Post. Even when I was living in Asia for 2 years, on the iPad version of the New York Post every day, supposedly just for the sports, but it was beyond that.
One more thing I would say. I used to, as a subscription, I received The Economist. If anybody's ever read that before. Now, I had to stop receiving it because it comes every week and it's so dense, I just couldn't keep up. It's an incredible, I don't know how they write it every week with that much insight, every single week, but it covers the world. It's based out of England, and it gives you this great global perspective. It also, so if you're ever in an airport and you're like, what should I buy for the flight? Buy an Economist and just read it on the plane, because you're going to learn about countries you never really hear about in the news. And it's also going to help your vocabulary, because the words that they use and the way they write is beautiful. I don't think most Americans write that way, and it'll help your own vocabulary and your writing skills improve just by reading how they write. So I recommend, if you're just passing around, it's intellectual. It's also really good insight, and it's how the world kind of sees America, and that's important too. So, like, remember that next time you're looking at Hudson booksellers, you're like, which one? Oh, I'm gonna grab the, and push through it when it gets hard to read. Like, fight through it, but it's worth it because it's a great.
They also have a good iPad. They have a good iPad. It's a little pricey, but they have a good iPad edition, and again, you can move through that. I mean, you can move through those things more quickly, I think.
All right. Thank you. We have time for one more question. Oh, since your hand was up first.
Hi, I'm Wes Richter from Northern Illinois University. I'm the president of PRSSA there.
Aren't you a LinkedIn connection of Ron Culp?
Initially, my question was going to be directed at but it's going to be for you, Pat Ford. With consumers backing brands that
Dave
are
Sampson's the more handsome version of Pat Ford. Tonight.
with consumers backing brands that are more socially responsible, how do you see corporate social responsibility revolving in the next 10 years, and how will the PR industry play a role in that?
Great question, first of all. Thank you. So first of all, in many ways, corporate responsibility is a little bit like, we talk about that now a little different from we did even a few years ago, because just like with social media or digital, it's not a separate thing anymore. I think every company recognizes that that their purpose involves more than just a particular product or a particular profit number at the end of the quarter. And I think there are many companies that have demonstrated that very well, and including Dave's company, by the way. And so I think that it's very important, but it's part of every company. Yes, there's still a focus on certain aspects of that, but it's for the great companies, it's built into everything they're doing, and every part of their employee engagement, every part of their community engagement, because another part of that is listening, right? I mean, a part of your responsibility, as when you're dealing with customers, consumers, communities where you operate and whose environment you may be affecting, investors who may or may not be counting on you for their pension, and employees, of course. There is not these lines of demarcation among all those stakeholders that there used to be. They have access to the same kind of information. They're listening to many of the same voices, and so what companies realize, there's the Page Society. You know what the Page Society is? They put out a white paper a few years ago called the Authentic Enterprise, and it's worth. They've had some follow-ups to that, and in fact, Ketchum has helped them very much in developing those. But this Authentic Enterprise is worth going back and take a look at, because they talk a lot about how companies' sense of responsibility and sense of responsiveness and need for engagement with their various stakeholders is changing, and changing rapidly. And they have I think it's fair to say, Ron, a really amazing comment. I'm saying this to Ron as a former CCO, but also as somebody who thinks a lot about this. Somewhere early on in that white paper, they said, we being IBM, Johnson & Johnson, GE, and all these great companies, we recognize that we no longer control our message. And that's a big statement. Once upon a time, even if they didn't, they thought they did. And they thought the game was, let's go get some really clever tagline, and then it's just a matter of how much we're willing to spend on reach and frequency and so on. And we'll just tell people what we want them to think about our business. But now they've got to be either directly or virtually, they've got to be engaged. And that starts right in the workplace, and it carries through all the stakeholders. So that sense of responsibility in itself is evolving rapidly and has never been more important. And I think also it's just being committed to it is table stakes. That's not exceptional anymore. What's exceptional now is where you're finding really special ways to not only have that engagement and have that two-way communications, but also demonstrate how that's changing your behavior and the way you contribute to the community. Right? Barry agrees.
Table stakes are different today.
Absolutely.
All right, well, thank you guys for asking some really great questions, and thank you panelists for providing some very insightful answers. So, Ron is just going to close us out.
Thank you. Thank you. I have to really thank this panel, half of whom you're able to talk to. I apologize for schedule conflicts and probably some communication mistakes, which is all part of the public relations role, and I'll fall on the sword later. Anyway, I'm kind of glad, though. Don't tell the others. I'm really happy that you got to spend more time with these three incredible people. Don't tell the others, but I was really happy with a very wonderful conversation. The other thing I have to thank are the PRSSA leaders who asked the questions, some of whom didn't get to ask their questions. But if I weren't so old, I would be starting a PR agency, and you're all hired. Okay? Thank you very much. The other person I have to thank who volunteered last year and raised his hand again this year before I had a chance to ask is a fellow colleague of mine here at DePaul, who also is the advisor to the PRSSA chapter at DePaul. And he is the main communications vehicle with the students, with our students, and that's Jim Motzer. Thank you, Jim. With that, I'll tell you that tonight's program, and I am told that people are arriving, our other guest will be arriving at the United Center, but that program will begin by webcast. If you go to the Planck Center website, you'll be able to watch live starting at 8 o'clock tonight. 8 to 9. So any of you who are home and able to join in, that way you'll see the honorees, including these fine people, once again and hear wonderful things about each of them. So what we're going to do now is we're going to adjourn. You're going to be able to talk with them for a few minutes, and then I'll get a hook and pull them out. But thank you all for coming. Good luck with everything.